Welcome to Geek Fandom Media. I am your host, Chris, and you guys, I just got done watching the latest episode of The Last of Us Season 2. Now, I am thoroughly impressed with how much I'm really attaching to Dina's character in this series. Because from a gamer's perspective, her character was very much useless in the game, right? It was revealed in the last episode that she's pregnant. And in the game, Ellie's pretty much like, why didn't you tell me? We can no longer continue this mission. The show adapts it so differently for Dina, giving Dina much more heart, much more empathy, and much more of a purpose and motive. Sometimes I think this is Dina's story because of her relationship with Joel that was, shown at the very, beginning of this season. In the game, it was different. In the game, we didn't get to see Dina and Joel. So there was no attachment for these two characters. When Joel ended up dying in this season, Dina was there. Dina was traveling with Joel. So I'm loving the way that they're really adapting Dina and showing how useful she is in this series so far. Like when she was mapping everything out with Ellie, before going to the hospital and try to plan everything, I'm like, Dina's a badass. And then Dina's whole monologue about, her backstory and her first killing and the purpose and the reason why, and if she didn't end up killing the killer that killed her mother, she would have gone after him forever. I'm like, Ellie, why aren't you switched on like this? And the emotion that Isabella Merced is really just embodying and oozing out of her in that particular scene was very impressive. So I tip my hat. Dina so far has been my GOAT of the series for season 2. I mean, she's been absolutely fantastic. But as a whole, you guys, this episode was good. Yeah, there was certain things that felt like a little rushed, but then that's the gamer in me that's always like, what about this scene and that? Like, this has to happen. This is a different adaptation of the game. And that's something that every viewer who is the gamer, who's played the game religiously, have to come to terms with. So I really liked what they did with this whole element of the Seraphites and, the scars and this all-out civil war, because essentially that's what it is. And that's what's happening in Seattle. It's a massive civil war between the wolves and the Seraphites. And, you have Dina and Ellie who are caught up in the middle of it because they're selfishly going after the killers of Joel. And the whole Nora scene, which we'll talk about, which I loved, the whole hospital. And at the very beginning of this episode, they explained why they had to block off certain levels of the hospital, which I really liked. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Are we talking territories of the Rat King? Ooh. This next season, you guys, is going to be crazy when it comes to Abby's story. It is going to be wild. But I liked it, and it gave it so much more weight. So essentially, when Dina and Ellie are headed to the hospital and that whole sequence, it gets wild. And it's kind of started off very lighthearted, like a love action adventure. And then it takes a quick dark turn, and it was really well adapted. So when they're in the hospital and they encounter the stalkers, that whole sequence was insane. Now in the game, there's a very different sequence when you encounter a bunch of the stalkers, and it's more action-based. This series is definitely less action-based, even with the characters like Dina and Ellie. They're not like the badass characters that they are in the video game from an action perspective, right? The fighting sequences aren't as intense as they are in the games. This is more of a survival, series than anything. So when the stalkers started coming out, and you see the fear in their faces when they discover that there's more than one. It is absolutely terrifying because stalkers in the game, you guys, are some of the worst characters, or the infected to ever encounter, because they're smart, they hide, they run, they're scared. They're absolutely terrifying. So that whole sequence of Ellie and Dina running and Ellie kind of sacrificing herself. That whole scene was just bonkers to me. And then of course we get the introduction of Jesse now appearing in Seattle. Jesse is there, which is different from the game. Like I always state, very different from the game. But he comes, he saves the day. They take out the stalkers, and they encounter that the wolves are now after them. They're on their radar, and they're running, and they end up running into the woods where they first encounter the Seraphites and the Scars. And that whole scene was just absolutely crazy to me. When they hung the dude, they sliced it, you just see all this just spilling out. I was like, that is right from the video game. I loved it. It was crazy to me. The Seraphites are really well done in this series. I truly believe that I'm watching the Seraphites from the video game, literally, being brought to screen. It's really accurate to me. And, to see them encounter, it's different from the game, because in the game, Ellie ends up encountering the Seraphites and Scars by herself, and she ends up taking them out. But in this, you also have Jesse, and you also have Dina with them. So it's the three of them. But then they also get split up. And that's what I was really hoping for. Ellie's like, you guys go over, head this way. I'll meet you guys back at the theater or whatever. And I was like, yes, finally. Okay, now we're picking up speed to where this episode essentially needs to go. So she ends up making it out of the, the whole woods, ended up hiding in a massive tree. And then she gets to the hospital. Now, my issue with the hospital scene was it was too fast paced. I was like, that's it? We're done? Especially the whole, getting into the hospital, taking all the wolves out and end up getting to Nora. I felt it happened so fast. One of the dogs was after, Ellie. She hides and she ends up somewhere in the hospital, and she randomly ends up finding, Nora. I was like, oh, that's it? That's fast? I was like, she didn't take anybody out? Like I said, this series is not an action-based. It's more of a survival and story-based, adaptation of The Last of Us. But it didn't disappoint. When you see the interaction, you see Ellie, it triggers something in her. And, when Nora says, that bitch got what he deserved, oh, man, it was just wild to me, because Nora used that to kind of get Ellie off of her skates a little bit, right? To get her off the ground and rattle her cage. And it worked, So she ended up running just like in the video game. It was so perfect. I was like, oh, hell yeah. And you have to remember that at the very beginning of the episode that they said that they blocked off certain barriers, certain levels to that hospital because of it being in the air. The infection is now in the air. The spores, that's the first time they're dealing with the spores. Joel knew about the spores, Ellie knew about the spores, but the wolves didn't know about the spores. And the way they handled the spore environment was so good and so brilliant. Seeing the infected stuck within the spores and seeing it coming out of their mouth, I was like, wow, this is really well handled. I was so impressed. So, Nora has no option. It's either get killed by Ellie or go down there with the spores, where she becomes ultimately infected. Now, in the video game, dude, you get down there, Nora's down there, you both take a tumble, and, you're fighting off the infected or whatever. It's wild, it's crazy. But, it's a little bit more different because, like I said, there are no infected down there that aren't the spores, that aren't, attached to the spores. So the whole red visual sequence of seeing Nora, trapped behind the door, no way out, this is it for you, was ultimately so well handled. And, Ellie tried to give her, a way out. Tell me where Abby is. Where is Abby? Nora's not going to tell because Nora's a ride or die. That's a good friend. But man, dude, that scene, dude, when she picked up that weapon and she's starting just going to work, it was just out of the video game, but less violent. But I was a little bit bummed it ended on the cliffhanger, because I was like, no, cliffhanger? And a flashback cliffhanger that is too. I was like, what? Joel's back at the very end of this episode for a flashback for Ellie. So definitely next episode is going to be more of a flashback scene with, Pedro Pascal back as Joel. But I ultimately really enjoyed this, man. I can't wait to see what Tommy's up to, because Tommy and Jesse went to go get Ellie and Dina in Seattle, right? They snuck out. So they snuck out. And you have to remember that, Tommy's relationship with Ellie is very different. That's like his essentially, it's like his niece. And that's the last piece of Joel that he has, is Ellie. So he's going to go after her. He's going to go save her. So his perspective in the video game is very different. He was the first one to head to Seattle. He was like, yo, I'm gone. I'm going to go get my brother's killer regardless. So it's very different. And when I appreciate that take. And I want to see just how far Tommy ends up going when he does encounter the wolves, when he does encounter certain people that were involved, in Joel's death. So I can't wait, man. Next episode is going to be an emotional one. It's going to be a whole flashback sequence, you guys. I can't wait to see more Pedro Pascal. You know, him as Joe has just been pitch perfect. And I was a little worried of how this show was going to go without his presence and without, you know, his lead charge, you know, for the remaining episodes. But, you know, so far, Dina's been a star. She's been shining more than Ellie for me, you know. So I think they're doing great so far. I'm loving this season, and I can't wait for the next episode. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about this newest episode of The Last of Us Season 2. Thoughts and opinions. And if you're a gamer, do you like the differences, you know, that they've made within the show and in the game thus far in Season 2? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And, of course, thank you guys for taking time out of your day for watching Geek Fandom Media. Peace.